Good afternoon, and welcome to Nourishment at Noon. I'm David McNinsky from Manchac United Methodist Church, and Monday through Friday at noon, we try to offer a bit of encouragement and or edification in some way during this time of the pandemic and crisis. During the month of May, on my Monday and Wednesday opportunities, I want to think with you about heroes, some and heroines. Some you will recognize from history, but others will just be people I have met in my life as well, and you may or may not know them. My rationale, as I mentioned Monday, is that I believe that this pandemic, as in every crisis, is a time for heroes and heroines. But oftentimes it's really a time for everyday heroes and heroines, people that may not show up on the evening news or in social media, but nevertheless are behaving in ways that are heroic. So today I want to talk with you about some folks from a long time ago that you probably have never run across in life. About 40 years ago, when I came to Durham, North Carolina to go to seminary, I was also working part-time as a student associate pastor. This meant in the school year, I only worked part-time, but in the summer, I was full-time working with the youth and taking them on trips and activities. But also, I expanded my job description to call on a number of people and visit in the hospitals as well. Some of the folks I called on were people that weren't able to get out to church as much, or there were people that would just appreciate a pastoral visit. So I was given a list of folks to call on, and I worked through that list on a rotational basis. I have to tell you about a couple that stand out to me. The first was a couple that they're very kind, very delightful, very supportive of me, very friendly when I would come to visit. The problem was the husband was hard of hearing and wasn't interested in using his hearing aid. So oftentimes she would have to yell and I would have to talk more loudly to get his attention. One time I remember coming up the driveway, the front door was open, it was a nice day, and the screen door was all that was closed. So I could hear clearly what she was yelling to him. As I came up the driveway, I heard her say clearly and loudly, "Harold, look, it's the little preacher boy." Well, I was a little embarrassed as the little preacher boy when I got to the door and a little bit offended later. But, 40 years, the other side of that event, some days I really wish I could be the little preacher boy again. The other couple, though, that I visited more often than the rotation suggested I should was a couple named Tom and Carol. Tom and Carol had moved in about the last decade from the United Kingdom. They were born, the best I could tell, around the turn of the 20th century and probably were close to 80 at the time that I was visiting them. And they had come to America because their only son had married an American and was living there, and they decided in the latter years of their life they wanted to be closer to him and to their grandchildren. Well, as first time I met them, we started talking and I was doing the math and I figured out they must have lived in the UK during World War II, so I asked them if they could tell me about it. They told me indeed they lived in London, and in fact they had lived there all during World War II, and they remembered especially recounting the Blitz, where the Nazis bombed them most every night in the fall of 1940. And I remember being so fascinated by their discussions and how they talked about it so matter-of-factly and yet so clearly it was still etched in their memories. It set me on a journey that I've continued ever since. I'm always interested in all things World War II, especially British things World War II. Right now on my desk here in the office, I have a 1-volume biography of Churchill that I haven't finished yet. On my phone, I have another book by Eric Larson called The Splendid and the Vile, and it's about the Blitz and the defiance of Churchill and the importance of family during the Berlin Blitz is what it's about. It even affects my TV viewing. Last night on PBS, there was a special on Queen Elizabeth and her World War II years as Princess Elizabeth, when most, of course, children who could get out of London got out of London. Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret stayed there during these dark days of the Blitz, and that was an encouragement to so many people. It affects even my tourism activities. My family, my wife first, and then my youngest son have been dragged by me to Churchill's Bunker in London, and then I even paid for kind of a cheesy exhibit, but I paid for it anyway, where you got to go and pretend you were in an air raid during 1940, and you had to scramble to get down to the tube, to the subway, to protect yourself from the German bombs that were dropping all around. But mainly, I think Tom and Carol inspired me because of what I saw in them and learned from them. A number of things I learned. The first one was this, that the time of living in the Blitz called for sacrifices from them, as it called from sacrifices for all the British people living in that time. You woke up each day and weren't sure whose house or what store was destroyed, and yet you still had to help one another rebuild, clean up first, and then rebuild, and then carry on with your life, including go into your job if there was anything left of your job that you could get to that next day. Tom also, as about a 40-year-old, had to be a part of the home guard or the home militia. So I thought about their sacrifices. I thought about that as they talked to me, they didn't think they were heroes at all. They weren't acting heroically. They were just doing what needed to be done. Do you remember Cal Ripken, the great Hall of Fame baseball player who set the record for the most baseball games played in a row? He was treated and lauded as a hero, but you may recall he said, "I'm not a hero. The real hero are the men and women who every day get up and go to their jobs. I go to a game, baseball." And I almost think that was Tom and Carol's attitude. They didn't see anything heroic that they were doing, but it sure seemed heroic to me. Another lesson I learned from them was the importance of the fact that they were in it with other people. That part of what kept them going every day was not just the instinct to survive, but the fact that they had other people in the same situation with them, and they helped each other out, and they found that they were more together than they were individually. There was a sense of solidarity that helped them get by. And they also taught me about the importance not only of community, but faith. And they didn't talk about it in platitudinal ways, but it was obvious to them that they knew that they were not alone in the midst of this crisis. And they talked about the role their faith had played then and in every day since then, the rest of their lives. But I guess what I remember most in talking with them is this. When they talked about those very dark days of World War II and the darkest days of being bombed every night by the Luftwaffe, it was almost like a smile began to come to their face. Their eyes lit up in a way that they only lit up when I usually only saw them light up that way when they were talking about their grandchildren. I've heard and read research that says sometimes when we come through crisis, we look back on it and find that in the crisis, we were more alive in those extraordinary days than we were in the midst of our most ordinary and privileged and normal times. And I learned that from them. Not that they would go back there again or wish the destruction and death that they saw, but they knew there was something about being in there and making it through, that it was a time like no other. And so it reminded me that you and I, living in this time of pandemic, are heroes. Not because we've done anything perhaps great or stupendous in our own eyes, but because we get up each morning and we do what we have to do again. And it also reminds me that if we get to the other side of this, or when we get to the other side of this, we may look back and find that we were, because we were together in this crisis, alive in ways that we had not been alive to before or since. I read some research yesterday that talked about that crises follow predictable patterns. It usually starts with a sense of great heroics. And then it goes into a sense of honeymoon or goodwill. Do you remember that after 9/11, Democrats and Republicans stood together for a brief period of time and set aside their differences? But then it says the heroism and the honeymoon are generally followed by a period of disillusionment. Then the difficulty of the picking up in the aftermath of the crisis begins to set in, whether it was a hurricane, an economic crisis, or a pandemic. But they also saw this, that they also move eventually, maybe after months or even years, to a period they call recovery. And so I don't know where you're feeling today. Heroic? Are you feeling solid with other people? Or maybe disillusionment is beginning to kick in. But know this, we will make it through. We will make it together. And maybe even we will be able to look back one day with a slight smile. God bless you as you continue this journey of faith this week.